Overwhelmed by the huge influx of undocumented immigrants who've made their way to the U.S. border from Central America, many of them children, Texas officials say they will begin flying hundreds of the immigrants to San Diego. Last week, they'd canceled those flights without saying why, but as of this weekend, they are apparently back on. Democratic leader of the House, Nancy Pelosi, visited a border facility in Brownsville, Texas, just yesterday. Just one example of how the humanitarian crisis at the border has been a galvanizing event. Conservatives look at the pictures coming out of Texas, and they say that the borders need to be enforced more, while liberals look at the flood of undocumented children and want to pass legislation that would allow for eventual citizenship. They still have one thing in common. If there were a Venn diagram of the activists fighting hard to see legalization take place and the conservative lawmakers who fiercely oppose reform beyond enforcement, the overlap in the middle would be that both sides are mad at President Obama. In the last 2 days, the president has ripped into Republican lawmakers for opposing his economic agenda. But he could just as easily have been referring to immigration reform. It was 1 year ago yesterday that the Senate passed a measure that would provide sweeping immigration reform. And it got 68 votes, a lot of Republicans part of that 68. And Politico reports that the victory prompted Speaker John Boehner to issue a challenge. He privately told a pro-reform group that if they could drum up a lot of public support during last summer's congressional recess, without prompting lots of vocal demonstrations from the Tea Party and other opponents, then he would take up the issue in the fall. This is what the crowd looked like when Congressman Steve King of Iowa addressed an anti-immigration rally in Richmond, Virginia last August. Only a smattering of people. And this was the size of the crowd when pro-reform activists marched in Washington that same month. It's fair to say that immigration advocates did win August of 2013. They kept up their end of that supposed bargain with John Boehner. But as we all know, immigration reform in the House didn't happen and hasn't happened. It's not that members of both parties haven't tried. John Boehner called for the legalization of undocumented immigrants on paper. The GOP retreat in January was described as a major shift for Republicans in Congress. And in April, the speaker mocked his colleagues at a Rotary Club luncheon in his district. As recently as this month, Politico reports that Florida Republican Mario Diaz-Balart has been trying to drum up support among his colleagues for a bill that would address both legalization and border enforcement. Just yesterday in Chicago, pro-reform advocates demonstrated outside the district office of Congressman Dan Lipinski. But the rally came after this happened. It's House Majority Leader Eric Cantor being kicked out of Congress. He became a short-timer. He lost his primary and then lost his leadership position as well because he failed to fend off a Tea Party challenger a few weeks ago. It's debatable whether immigration was the cause of all those votes against him, but it definitely guaranteed this. Immigration reform will not happen before the midterm election in November, at least not legislatively. Here to discuss this, joined by Congressman Luis Gutiérrez. He joins us from our bureau in Chicago. Appreciate the time, Congressman, this morning. So that last point, let me start with this, how the story of these undocumented children sort of intersects with the push for immigration reform. Because until all of this happened with the children, we'd been hearing that, okay, if Congress doesn't take up immigration reform, the president's going to take out his pen and he's going to take executive action. Now he has Republicans up in arms saying there's a crisis at the borders. It's been caused by, President Obama's deferred action. It's been caused by a lack of enforcement. And they're trying to make it much tougher because of this to take executive action. Do you think what's happening at the border right now is going to affect whether the president does take executive action?
It doesn't help, Steve, right? I mean, we can't be tone deaf to what's happening on the border. It makes Democrats, when we see a humanitarian crisis and we say, put the children in a safe place, as though we're for open borders. We're not. As a matter of fact, all of our legislation would properly secure the border and make it more secure than ever before. But having said that, look, I think the president's going to do the right thing. He's going to do the right thing by the children. He's going to do the right thing in this humanitarian crisis. And I just want to say, imagine after that judiciary hearing this week, in which Republicans talked about children bringing diseases, bringing drugs, being part of a criminal enterprise, in which they mocked them. It was really chilling.
When you say the president's going to do the right thing, specifically, what are the actions you think he's going to be taking and you want him to take?
Here's some actions. Look. Remember, we've had this conversation before in dialogue with the president. He said he couldn't do it, but then in June of 2012, he freed over 600,000 Dreamers who today have work permits, Social Security cards, and in most states, except the morons in Arizona, have driver's licenses and are becoming more and more part of our society. I think the president can take an action to say, you know what? Why don't we let the parents of those dreamers stay? They inculcated those values in those young people. There are 5 million American citizen children. And there's a Huffington Post report just this week that said 72,000 American citizen children lost their moms and dads due to deportations last year. 72,000 American citizen children. That's another group. And then we have soldiers. There are so many people, Steve, that the president could help. And I believe the president is going to be wide and broad and deep in his executive action. So he said in the State of the Union he was going to use his pen. I believe he is going to use his pen.
So we also, the further context for this, and we talked about it earlier in the show, is the lawsuit that Speaker John Boehner wants now against the president on executive action, which, as Perry Bacon was saying at this table a few minutes ago, the idea maybe is to have a chilling effect on executive action on immigration. And you're looking at the rhetoric, as I said a second ago here, the rhetoric of Republicans about this situation on the border. Sure. If the president does what you're saying, what kind of response is that going to generate from the right, and is that going to spill over to public opinion?
Right. Here's where I think, look, Steve, you, in the opening, established that at every time, in every forum, at every challenge that the pro-immigrant community, we've won, and we've met and exceeded the challenge. The fact is the American public is with the pro-immigration. You have a small group of Tea Party people, actually a small segment of the Republican Party, which is stopping what the American people want, which is to fix our broken immigration system and put this illegal broken immigration system with a legal immigration system. So look, I think the President of the United States should act and should act boldly. From my point of view, on the one hand, you have Republicans who are criminalizing children at the border. They're saying they want to now repeal DACA that allowed dreamers, 600,000 of them, to legalize their statuses. And they're saying they're going to sue the president at every step. I say bring on the lawsuit. I say we elected Barack Obama to be our champion, to be our leader, and he can lead on this issue through executive action, and he should. And I believe that he will. Look, you know, I mean, let's do it broadly. Let's do it wide. Let's help the 11 million people.
Very quickly, I just want to ask you one more thing, because I'm told that on this subject, one of the things that bothers the president maybe more than anything else is that reform advocates who call him the deporter-in-chief, that term has been thrown around, and the idea is that the White House strategy of building political support potentially for reform is to be very hard on enforcement, you know, for the last several years. What would your message be to pro-reform advocates who use that term? Is it fair, and what would you tell them?
Number one, I understand, and I think, look, when people say that, I understand. And I think it is a fair statement to make. Having said that, I think we're in a different time right now, Steve. Yeah. This last Thursday, I went and I gave a speech on Wednesday. We had a press conference on Thursday where we said, look, the pro-immigration movement keeps getting tied down by many of my friends and colleagues in the House of Representatives, the Republican majority, and they keep saying, if you do anything executively through executive fiat, we're not going to negotiate with you. Negotiate what? You have not. You make a proposal, as you indicated in your opening last January, and then you take it away. Every challenge we have met, you said, oh, we want to do it piecemeal. We said okay. We said we don't want the Senate bill. We said okay. They said everybody can't become a citizen right away. We didn't leave the table. What more do we have to do to understand that it is time? 1,000 people will be deported today. There are children being left without parents. The devastating effect. And everywhere I go across this country, people don't tell me, move on the legislation. They say, have the president take action to stop the deportation and the devastating effect on our community. And I think everyone across America understands that.
All right. I want to thank Congressman Luis Gutiérrez of Illinois. Appreciate you getting up this morning. Up next, we travel from the Texas border north to Dallas to the Texas Democratic Convention so Wendy Davis can tell us how